I'll sit here, but I'll use that. Yeah, thanks. That's great. So I appreciate so much what Brian shared, and I also appreciate what Pastor Tahir. You say your name, Tahir?
Tahir.
Tahir. I have a story of another Dr. Tahir in Boston. I'll tell that. But can you help me?
Yeah, sure will.
So if everybody get one of those, and then I'm changing direction. I didn't bring enough of these, but they're like 5. So make sure at least one table has one of those, because I'll just talk off of that for a few minutes. You know, I really affirm what Pastor Emmanuel said. There was, you know, with what has happened in Boston this week, and what has happened in Boston out of 9/11, there was a Muslim man who grew up in Saudi Arabia. His name's Ali Aboud, and he grew up with the Bin Ladens. And he came to the United States as a student, and there were Christian families that reached out to him for 10 years. And his own testimony is it's through the love and the witness of this Christian family, and by being with this Christian family, that turned him from being this militant Wahhabi Muslim who wanted to go on jihad, but his parents would not bless him in doing it. And according to the Hadith, unless your parents will bless you, you're disobeying Allah if you do that. And because he listened to his parents, he wouldn't, or he would have maybe followed the same trajectory as bin Laden. But his own testimony of his conversion was the most influential thing was this American Christian family who welcomed him into their home. And now he and 4 other Muslim background believers have written a book on a critical analysis of the Quran, and his life's in peril. But to me, it's interesting that his conversion story was just what Pastor Emmanuel was saying. So I really, can I have one of those, Jarvis, one of the ones in the picture? Yeah. My piece of sharing, I was going to share about a thing called a project that we did that just is working out of this, and it's called Hidden Treasures of the Kingdom, and that's the sheet with the picture on it. And Pastor Emmanuel is a perfect example of this. So in a city like Boston or Chicago or Dallas or whatever, there are people like Pastor Emmanuel. And one of the ways I've come to describe them is these are hidden treasures of the kingdom. A lot of times they're there and they're doing amazing, amazing, amazing work on very limited resources. And many of the established American churches don't even know they exist. Or they're not relating to them in any meaningful way. And we certainly have folks like that in Boston. And so we did this project called the Hidden Treasures of the Kingdom Project. But let me frame this story a little broader than what I originally thought I would do. And there's a sheet per table maybe that talks about different things that we do in intercultural ministries out of our work in Emmanuel Gospel Center. And let me just tell the narrative from this paper. So on this paper it says what our mission is of intercultural ministries: to connect the body of Christ across cultural lines in order to more fully express and advance the kingdom in the city, region, and world. So what we try and do and what I do is to connect the body of Christ to these cultural lines and introduce people to one another and connect them for relationship building, conversations, mutual learning, and then out of that learning and relationship, then cooperation and collaboration and doing work together. So how do we do that? On the sheet it says a narrative list, and there are different categories that talk about the kind of work we do and how we do that. So letter A is applied or relational research, and then underneath it are projects that fall in that category this year that we're doing. B is connecting and networking, and then there are things that we do under that. The bullet points are things we're actually doing this year. C is direct ministry. We're actually doing ministry in a direct way. And 4 is the training. But sometimes it's hard for people to get a grip on what do you do, because it's not just one thing that we do. it's multiple things. So let me tell the narrative that weaves a lot of these pieces together that I think gets at this hidden treasures of the kingdom. So one of the things, like Brian was saying, you have to exegete your city, and there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. One of the ways that we did it is in a thing called the New England Book of Acts. And this is a hard copy of our New England Book of Acts. And this is just a narrative account of different streams that have sprung up in and out of Boston in the last 35 years. And we said, let's just do it like the book of Acts in the Bible. It was a narrative of the first 30 years of the early church. And so we said, let's just follow that pattern. Let's document it. In order to document it, you have to go to the people who were doing it. In other words, how did it happen where there were no Haitian churches to 200 Haitian churches in 30 years? How did it happen from 0 to 88 Korean churches? From 0 to 75 Brazilian churches. How did that happen? Well, in order to find the answer to that, you have to go to the people that are doing it, right? And you go and you listen. And so then it isn't like that we as Americans are going and trying to control anything or say, you come to our program. We want you to come help us do what we're doing. No, we're saying, what are you doing? and we give them dignity to honor what God is doing among them. And we listen to their story. And this takes a lot of time. So this book represents, hundreds, if not thousands of hours of listening. And in the process of listening, you want to hear the whole story. It's not just good, right? It's not a panacea. The book of Acts lists the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And this book expresses the good, bad, and the ugly. And that's the story that you want to hear. And then we have to sign off on it. So we tell the story of the Haitian movement, but they have to sign off on it. Because it can't just be us telling the story, it's actually them telling the story. Okay? In the process of doing that piece of applied research, or what I would call relational research, what it does, it helps you to establish a level of trust where you actually can do things together, flowing out of that you couldn't have done before you did that. So in this little thing, I have numbers next to some of these bullet points. So I'm telling a story that, so an entry point was doing this, listening through relational research. Out of that, one of the things that flowed was this hidden treasures of the kingdom. So what we did, out of all these hundreds of people, we selected 4 people that we felt that we got to know over several years. We worked with them. And we selected 4 practitioners. One from Cambodia, Pastor Posanung, survivor of the killing fields. One from Liberia, who came out of the Liberian Civil War. One from Bangladesh, who was the superintendent of the Southern Baptists of Bangladesh. But many people don't even know who he is when he comes to Boston. He was a leader in Bangladesh. Came from a Hindu background. Had a dramatic conversion to Jesus. Pastor Posan came from a Buddhist family, a survivor of the killing fields, is now a follower of Jesus. And then we also selected one other lay person who is American-born, who started an organization that's serving the diaspora communities in and around her church. We selected these 4 people as what we call hidden treasures of the kingdom. And we advocated for them as an organization. I've got a church in the suburbs, a large church, that was a little bit in tune with this whole diaspora movement, to host an event that would honor and tell the stories, or give a platform to tell the stories of these hidden treasures of the kingdom. And then we leveraged our strength, rather than for our benefit, but for the benefit of them. And it wasn't like a huge event. We probably had around 200 people come to this event. And we planned the program together. So there was Cambodian dance, and everybody brought their own unique foods, and we developed the program together. We all invited people in our networks. I think we had people from about 10 states that came. And the purpose was to tell the stories of these ministries and try and connect people to them, to help them, to work with them, to utilize resources that they were doing. Because many of them, for example, Pastor Paul Biswas from Bangladesh, he says, I'm here to reach South Asians, Hindus, and Muslims, but I can't do it without the American church. I want to help empower and equip the American church to do it. But if he can't get his foot in the door into American churches, how can that gift be received? So we're a connector, we're an advocator, And also, many of us that are doing this kind of work, some of us, like me, I'm a missionary. So how do I sustain myself? I have to raise money. And as a white missionary, I've been in Boston since 1984, and I have a lot of relationships, but let me tell you, sustaining yourself as a missionary in a missionary model is not easy. But can you imagine people that come poor, refugees, and then they relate to some of the American ecclesiastical and mission structures, and they say, okay, you got to go out and raise your money, your budget, $50,000 or whatever. And these folks, they don't have that relational network. I mean, it's hard for us, right? And so for me, as a white missionary, like I said, I can't just be concerned about me. I got to be concerned about them. And so what are ways that we can think creatively? And so we tried this as a pilot project. And so one piece of it was economic. And so what we did, we approached a foundation and said, would you give us a matching grant for how much ever money we raised that night through people making a donation, that you would match it. And I was on the phone on the way to the event, still trying to figure out whether this foundation was going to do it. And they didn't. And so that night, I said, part of this thing is about finance, about economics. And so I told the event that night, because I was the one that was throwing the line out. And I said, so whatever we get in tonight, this is what's going to go. We wanted to have this matching grant. And there was a pastor from a small church there, and he said, I may get in trouble for this, but I'm gonna just by faith give the matching grant on the spot. Wow. And this guy, not a big church or anything, and or up to a certain point. So that night, in a very humble way, we raised over $6,000, which isn't a ton, but it's much more than these folks typically would be able to raise. And we divided it among them equally, and we also documented all of the results of that night in terms of connections that were made to see really what happened as a result of that night. There were people from other cities who came, and one of the things I said, this isn't like going to really solve the whole problem, but if we can inspire some other people to think this way. So there were some people from other cities who had influx of diaspora folk coming in. And so now Portland, Maine came, and they want to do it. And so now we are sending one of our folks who helped to do it to go coach Portland, Maine to do it. Okay? So that's the second piece of the story, is this hidden treasure model. But I also want to, so this is about loving your international neighbors. So, I say, first, make sure that we love our Christians who are coming from around the world. We think, how do we reach the non-Christian? But there's an interrelationship. If we can relate and love our Christian brothers and sisters, they can become the resource that we need to be able to reach the non-Christian, the Muslim, the Hindu, the Buddhist. And so I wanted to just kind of continue the story to say some other things that have flowed out of this. Through this, one of the participants, Pastor Paul Biswas from Bangladesh, he and I also went to another church that I had a strong relationship with. I was able to advocate for him, so they picked him up as a missionary support because he has a vision to try and equip churches in reaching out to Hindus and Muslims. So now, not only did they support me, they support him, but then we teamed up and did a training, because a half a mile down the street is the largest mosque in Greater Boston from this church. And they've never related to this mosque. And so he and I did a class, taught about 25 folks together. I couldn't have done it nearly as effectively without Paul, but he couldn't have done it nearly as effectively without me. So we did it together, and we did this training, and so that was the third thing that flowed out of this. The fourth thing that there's the training is direct ministry. So now we have a relationship, we're reaching out to the mosque. And I stopped. I really wouldn't have confidence to go into a mosque and meet an imam, but the reason that I have more confidence to do it is because people who become cultural mentors to me, like Paul, I've gone with them to do this. So now I'm a little more emboldened and equipped. I went down to the mosque one day, I just felt inspired. And I went on a Sunday, they were having their Sunday school, a couple of hundred kids. And I had already reached out to some of the folks there, but I was never able to make a strong connection, so I just showed up. They were having prayers, and the men were having prayers, and so they invited me to the prayer room, and I waited through the time of prayers. They were, doing, I was over in the side, praying and everything. And then when we got to their time of prayer, the imam invited me into his office, and we spoke for an hour. And I'm telling you, not exaggerating, he must have told me 5, if not 6 times, there's never been a Christian pastor who's come and just showed up. And he thanked me, profusely. And it was interesting. As a fellow clergy, I wasn't prepared for this. He totally opened himself up to me and talked about how stressful it is for him to be serving as an imam in the United States. How stressful it is. And he really became kind of transparent with me, or vulnerable. And so in 2 weeks, we will have a tea with the imam and leaders from that mosque with our pastor and leaders from the church down the street. This flowed out of this research, the hidden treasures, knowing Paul, working together, training, now direct ministry. Out of this too, we're doing Muslim Bible studies with Pastor Paul in his home and in other homes. We have a colleague, one of my colleagues that works with me, we have on our staff a minister of Christian-Muslim relations. He's a white guy like me, about my age, but he lived in Egypt for 12 years and he's fluent in Arabic and all that. So he works with Paul as well. And they've done a series of Bible studies in homes. One of the Bible studies they're doing now in Pastor Paul's home in Dorchester section of Boston, they had the former education minister of Iraq, Dr. Tahar, who's been coming to the Bible study. At first he didn't want his family to know. A couple weeks ago was the first time he invited his family to join him. And this has been going on for many months. And, my friends have said that, he's a hair. He's very open to the gospel. He's a hair from giving his, opening himself up to Jesus. But again, this line happened out of this. That was made possible because of us relating to 2 more points. And then training. Because we were doing this, I pulled together 3 practitioners who are Christian leaders who were reaching out to Muslims. And we did a video conversation of 2 hours of conversation. We basically had 10 questions. And so you can go on YouTube and access this. There's each 10-minute segment deals with 1 question. And Pastor Paul, 2 other practitioners, and I was kind of doing an interview. And it's really just trying to capture, what we're learning about Christian engagement with Islam. That's the overall subject of it. And Pastor Paul added such value to the conversation. And any of you, if you go online, you can access it. It's like questions like, what advice would you give to a church that's in close proximity to a mosque? What are some positive examples of Christian engagement with Muslims in your community? What are some of the greatest challenges of Christian engagement with Muslims? And we did this in a totally transparent way that if a Muslim came across it, we would have no problem with a Muslim seeing it. We're not like hiding. One of the questions was, if a Muslim comes across this on YouTube, what would you want to say to them? And, very transparent in terms of who we are, what we're about. And so that's like a training thing. But that training thing was made possible, or at least was enhanced, because of the hidden treasures of the kingdom that were in our midst. And then the last thing is kind of the fruit. Every couple of months, we're part of a group that brings together Christian leaders who are working among Muslims in New England. And so we have a thing we call a listening or a prayer consultation. And so usually about 40 to 60 Christian leaders that are doing things in outreaching to Muslims in southern New England come together to have this little prayer consultation. They report what's going on, and then we pray for them. And then there's networking that happens and that sharing. Because we've been doing that with people like some of these hidden treasures and others, the Coalition for Ministry to Muslims in North America will be hosted in Greater Boston in October. So I know Roy O he's kind of the lead of that. He's at the summit this year. Has done some seminars and stuff. So this is a national kind of premier training event for practitioners who are reaching out to Muslims, and it will be held in Boston. But our capacity to do it, to host it, is because of the relationship that we have with people like this. And so that's kind of the story of the Hidden Treasures of Boston. I wanted to kind of tell it in that way so you kind of got the complete picture to see the rhythm and texture of the way that we relate to it, and maybe there would be something there that can catch you